to decide whether or not it's worth it.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, good questions, man. Let's see. Does Nikki have a question? Nikki, I saw you were one of the first three to jump in. Just here to listen and learn. Well, Nikki, do not be shy to ask anything. Eric just hopped in. Eric, did you have any questions?
Thanks, Ryan. No, I'm just listening right now. I got a bunch of stuff going on here, so just listening in. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Trent, did you want to talk in a little bit more detail about that opportunity you're looking at? I'm happy to answer more questions.
Well, the opportunity is already owned. It's just now a matter of completing the infill, right? So
Okay, so
the asset's already owned. I'm managing the park already. We're finalizing the homes that came with the property that haven't been used, and now
okay.
we're in the stage of figuring out what to do with these vacant lots.
Okay, so you already own the asset or you're just third party managing it?
Well, I work with my buddy owns the asset,
Gotcha.
and I'm managing it for him, turning it around for him.
Gotcha. Okay, so you're effectively a third party management because you don't get any of the equity.
Effectively, yes.
Yeah, look, and okay, so it's 142 spaces. How many occupied and how many vacant lots?
So we have 142. Let me see. I'm trying to look at the mix right now. 1 second. So there is roughly 22 vacant lots and 33 vacant homes. We
Hmm.
should have the 33 homes finalized and occupied within this calendar year.
Okay.
And then we have uh, 57 and 32. It's two parks operated as one. They're right next to each other. 57 and 32 is what's 57, 89 occupied. So 89 occupied,
Mhm.
33 vacant homes, and then 22 vacant lots.
So how much money do you have will you have in these homes, these 30 vacant homes, once they are move-in ready or ready to be sold? What would you guess?
Probably about 600,000
Okay, so in other words, uh 20,000 a home.
roughly. I'd say that's fairly fair.
Okay, so and it's going to take you at least all year to get them sold and leased up in some
Yeah.
capacity, either sold or rented out.
Yes, I believe it will take the rest of the year.
Just from a purely financial perspective, you're gonna have $600,000 of cash that is now turned into a physical asset that is not cash flowing for at least a year, in part, right? Assuming you rip through these home sales, right? Because effectively, what you need is 30 home sales, and the rest of this calendar year, let's just say we have 8 more months, so 30 homes divided by 8 months is 3.75. So call it four home sales a month, which is one home sale a week. I approve approximately a third of people who apply. Um, the more tertiary, more secondary, tertiary markets I have, it gets even less and less and less. The worst market I'm in is Tallahassee. I approve about 15% of people who apply. Other markets I'm in, it's sub 20%. But let's just hypothetically say your threshold's a little bit lower. Let's say, one out of three people, Trent, that apply, they end up with a clean criminal and good enough credit and everything to have them get the thumbs up to move in. That means 4 people to move in a month times at least 3 people who have to apply, or 12 people that you're going to need to apply, assuming, one out of three. If we're wrong there, and let's say it's 25%, then that's basically 4 times 4, or 16 people who need to apply, or plus or minus, 4-ish a week. That may be a tall order to have 4 people show up and apply a week. It might not. It might not. So that's another consideration there. But if I'm going to spend, X numbers of hundreds of thousands of dollars on infilling another 20 or so unit lots. Like, let's say, hypothetically, you can infill a home for $30,000 and you have 20 lots. That's $600,000 cash. That's not paying you money during this process. So when, eventually, if you do an IRR calculation, and the later years are great, you got to remember that the first year, it's a big fat zero. In fact, it's negative, and that's going to bring down your IRR in the long run. And then if you look at, well, what happens if you struggle selling these 30 homes? Let's say you're only able to pull off, pick off a one a month because it's a tertiary market. Then all of a sudden you're talking 30 months to get all of those leased up, and that gives me some pause. So it all depends on the market, what your threshold is to say yes to a resident. Because I mean, in theory, if you're saying yes to half of the people, you could probably rip through these pretty quick. Then the question is, are you evicting folks, and do you have turn, and how much are you going to spend on the turn,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, if I'm your buddy, just from a purely financial standpoint, I'm going, look, even if I'm made of money, even if I'm made of money, it's still not a great return on my investment to rip $600,000 infilling 20 homes when I have 30 homes that I haven't sold yet. Maybe I can't sell, maybe I can, maybe I can sell them, but slowly. But like, do I want to just go and dump another $600,000 into a property when I have $600,000 now, technically not paying me today? That would be the high level financial question I would ask there, because it's a lot of money, and that
No,
600
it
grand could
is.
could go to buy more mobile home parks and properties.
Yeah, I mean, and that's I think, and I appreciate you answering that question, because to me, the logic of leaving the homes completely unused does not make any sense. So the homes that are sitting there, we need to get them online. The next phase then would be what to do with the vacant lots. And it very well might be the better use of the money would be to acquire another asset and get the volume there, as opposed to fill in the last 20% of this one particular asset.
I'm going to hit you with some live data. So in Tallahassee, Florida, I currently have 353 total pads. And of those 353 total pads, 61 of them are vacant lots. I have 76 vacant mobile homes right now in that city and 216 residents. I'm getting $695 of lot rent in Tallahassee, Florida. Um, 76 sounds like a lot of vacant units. 61 sounds like a lot of vacant lots. By the way, the majority of these are direct build, power, water, sewer, concrete pads. Nice community with a pool. Uh, I have no trouble at all leasing up homes. I average 55 applications a month, so that's a little over 10 a week, but we approve, like I said, about 15% of them. I average in Tallahassee about 9 move-ins a month and about 5 move-outs, meaning I'm a little worse than every other person that moves in ends up moving out. So in other words, just call it a 50% stick rate. What
Yep.
that means is just easier math. I have 75 homes that I have to lease up, but not really, because if I go and sell 150 homes, 75 people of those folks are going to move out. That's going to get me to zero vacancy. In other words, it is a brutal process of having to just churn through people to get someone who wants to pay, follow the rules, and stay put. It's tough. So it has been a no-brainer for us to let those vacant lots remain vacant. Now, maybe in a couple years, Trent, when we're down to less than 20 homes, maybe we look at this and go, hey, let's move in some new homes. Or maybe we dispossess of this asset to a group who goes, hey, look, we specialize in infill and direct build utilities in a institutionally graded property with over at FS1 we have, what is it, 313 sites. It's huge. It's huge. That may be the right answer one day, but the math clearly points to don't infill the lots, even though this asset is probably worth approach at least in we just refinanced it, so we'll own it for another 4 to 5 years. I believe that come time to exit in 4 to 5 years, or refinance it, it's going to be worth over 100,000 a site, or at least at 100,000 a site. And assuming it's going to cost me 50 to 75 a vacant lot to infill them, does it make sense to infill them? Sure, maybe, right? Because in theory, like let's say it's worth $150,000 a site, just for easy math. Would it make sense to go and spend all of that money in filling 61 vacant sites? It might. However, don't forget too that when folks go to value these things, they don't value them by boxes on lots. They
Mhm.
value it as boxes on lots with people in it and paying. Because the primo people who pay the primo prices, so for example, Michael Pansolini's old company, they're a PE shop. They want primo stuff with that's buttoned up and they can coupon clip, right? With a little bit of upside, sure. They all say that, oh, we want a little bit of upside, like, okay. Um, the reality is if I go and infill 61 mobile homes into that community, there is no guarantee that I just doubled my money. Why? Because I'm going to then have to go and lease up those 61 homes. And my monthly net is about 3 homes in Tallahassee, meaning 3 times 12 is what, 36? So per year, I'm leasing, I have a net of about 36 homes. It would take me 2 years to fill in all of those new homes with the turn rates that we have out there. And I'm going to spend, let me whip out some math right now. 61 vacant lots times $75,000 is $4.575 million. Like, do I want to go and spend almost $4.6 million to sit for 2 years to make any cash flow return on that? Assuming we can properly pull this off. Like, maybe, yeah. I mean, if I could double that and make 4 or 5 million bucks, heck yeah. But the thing is, I'm not because I also have 76 other homes I got to lease up. And people are brutal. I mean, when they exit, they destroy homes. Like they just do. They show up and they don't clean up after themselves, and then they complain that to me that they have a cockroach problem, and then you get in the home and you're like, duh. Like, you got dog food everywhere, you don't put stuff away, you're a mess, and this is like my problem. I get, okay, I guess so. Anyways, all that to say, there's other considerations there, Trent. Even if the math can math in your favor, there's still strategic considerations. There's still just capital considerations in general. There's opportunity cost things to consider too. Yeah, um, it's a lot. We had a long call earlier today on group mentorship about how much I hate infill. So I don't know if I'm the one to ask to get anybody hyped up on infill.
No, it's a
Um,
Rubik's Cube, right? I mean, it is a very
yeah,
difficult puzzle to solve.
it is. And I've seen a lot of people get burned by it. With personal friends of mine, lost, thankfully, nobody has lost everything, but they've lost years off their life um, because the property is worth less now because they bought a bunch of new homes they can't lease up or tried to lease up or eventually leased up. But by the time they leased it up, it had run up such a huge bill that it's going to take years to get back to break even. Um,
Are you referring to just the debt required to accomplish that?
all of the above.
Yeah. Okay.
Debt, setup costs, turn costs, pref on money raised.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm just not gonna get anybody hyped on infill. Not saying it's a bad thing, not saying you should never do it under any circumstances. I'm just saying, as we just, demonstrated there, you got a $600,000 bill, or in my case, a $4.6 million bill. Can you get debt on it? Maybe. I've seen some people pull it off. I've seen others, myself included, struggle to find it. Or at least find it in scale, right? And even if you find that debt, in today's world, you're paying 6, 7% on that
Right.
debt, if not more, right? And like you gotta get those things leased up ASAP and cash flowing ASAP, otherwise that debt accrues, right? And so
Mhm.
like, yeah, I mean, I've seen people do it, I've seen people pull it off, Trent. Um, it's just tough. It's really tough. Rubik's Cube. I love how you put it. It's a Rubik's Cube. Can you solve for it? Yes. Is it the right answer? Probably not. Why? Because I would rather just go buy another mobile home park.
Well, it's nice to hear I'm not the only one.
I know. I would just rather buy another mobile home park. I like buying dirt. That's what I do.
I could
Yeah,
dig.
just to add to that, what we kind of concluded on here is that, and Ryan may have touched on this. I was working on getting the live stream live, but I wanted to just say that it's really development, right? And we don't think about it that way because it used to be really cheap to infill these homes. But given the increase in cost, it became a development project. So where you could, maybe in 2018, expect to pay a little bit for the ability to develop these sites, and expect to make a ton of money doing so. That's not necessarily the case anymore. And so on our mentorship call, I akin it to someone who's selling a plot of land in an urban area and telling you and making you pay, as if there was a multifamily developed there already. Like that's just not the case, right? And that's basically what you know what some sellers are forcing you to do with their initial pricing. It's like, oh yeah, well there's these 50 sites that you can develop. Look at all the upside. Yeah, I got to pay $100,000 a pad to develop it. What do you mean? It's not upside until I unlock it, and even then, it's affordable housing. How are we getting to, $1,000 site rents in the middle of, the Midwest? It doesn't necessarily make sense. And so I think there is that disconnect between the sellers and buyers in terms of like what value to assign to those pads. And the answer is zero until, unless the market can support it. We talked about on the last call, utilizing 21st or Vanderbilt or some of these other lenders to hold the note. That again, it doesn't work unless the market supports it. So we advocate, if you're going to go that route, if you plan on doing infill, to ensure that you do it slowly and make sure that it maths out for the first few before you just kind of dive in with both feet. So yeah, infill. We're not super bullish at the MHP Pros on infill, but we're hoping that it gets more economically sound in the future, and then also that if you are going to do that, that our mentees really kind of take it in installments, in in slow moving pieces. So, hey, try 2 or 3 using one of these lenders potentially, so you don't have to hold the note yourself and outlay all this capital, which is, it's possible for some of these larger PE shops who have access to it, but for those of us who need an immediate return or need to pay out a pref on that capital, um, it's not always feasible to be outlaying hundreds of thousands of dollars to develop pads. So anyway, I just wanted to put a bow on that and say it's not impossible, but right now it's hard in a lot of markets, and you definitely have to test ahead of time. Anybody else have any questions? Eric, Trent, we can come back to you if you want. Eric, I see you unmuted. You got something?
Yeah, it's not really operational question, but I'm wondering, Ryan, if you're willing to dive into sort of analyzing and executing on parks and flood zones. I commented on this, and you talked a little bit about strategy, and it seems to be cropping up a lot for me in deals that I see. So I'm just wondering sort of what to look at and be wary of, and when it might make sense and when it might not make sense.
Yeah, look, that's a great question because we are seeing lots and lots of mobile home parks in flood zones for a whole variety of reasons. Look, I think mobile homes and mobile home parks are the answer to the affordable housing crisis. These mobile homes can fit about anywhere, regardless of the shape of the parcel, the topography of the parcel, as long as you can run a simple water, sewer, and power line to it, you're good. Like it's really that simple. And if zoning departments can just get over the NIMBYism, the not in my backyard. Like if they could just get over that, there are so many unused parcels that could just be turned into housing. And guess what? We'll show up. Hey Eric, sorry dude, I gotta mute you. There's a little bit of background noise on you. Mike, unmute him after my answer here. Um, it's just sad because mobile home parks should be like they should be helping in a much more just in a grander scale. All you'd have to do is just permit it and just get out of our way as investors and um dude, a lot of stuff I own is on freaking private utilities. So we wouldn't even bring any capacity to utilities. Like I know you fill up the schools and you call the fire department, all that jazz, but like people need places to live and these are good answers. And a lot of times mobile home parks end up in flood zones because that's the only place that, the zoning department kind of said, okay, fine, you can put it there, right? Like place floods. Okay. Um, so you see it pretty frequently. And this is a really relevant to me, Eric, because we just closed on $105 million loan yesterday. And you know what happened? We have a bunch of our average lot size is 40 or 50. So we finally got a big institution in Wells Fargo to lend on it. And they were pumped for a lot of reasons. They were nothing but excited and complimentary all along the way. However, so it was good news for me because one day if we wanted to exit to a big institution who was like, well, wait a minute, you got a bunch of sub 100 lot stuff here. I don't know if I want this. We can be like, look at the debt I have on this. Like seriously, we have our debt is 5 point, I think it's 5 points. It worked out to 5.66% with a buy down for a 5 year term uh, with literally Wells Fargo CMBS debt on it. Incredible with stuff in flood zones. So, directly to your question here, Eric, about flood zones, what did a big institution with a big 9-figure loan have to say about it? They said, look, we don't love it, but here's the thing. As long as you get additional flood insurance and business disruption insurance, I guess we don't really care. So, what does that mean for me? What that means for me is one day, if an institution may very well buy me out because I just proved you can get primo debt on sub 50 unit, mostly sub 50 unit, non-institutionally graded properties with a handful of stuff in flood zones. I just proved that. That is now a fact. It just happened, right? However, however, when I go to sell one day, if I do, in my lifetime, if I do sell this in my lifetime, the end buyer to my stuff, as will I, will have to pay more insurance. And because more money goes to insurance, that means the NOI is going to be smaller relative to an academically perfectly similar situation just without the flood zone. So, in other words, the sale price will be impacted, it will be lower, and the friction costs will be higher because the bank wanted to do more inspections on the property for obvious reasons. Um, it's going to be more costly, and so therefore you got to buy it at a lower price, and you got to underwrite a lower price on the exit. So in other words, you can still do really well with them. I've got plenty, and I will buy more. Um, the one consideration I haven't mentioned yet, I got to be careful how I say this because I do not want this to turn into a political discussion. Unfortunately, apparently science is now up for debate and climate change is up for debate. Now, I'm not going to say if I think climate change is real or not. I'm just going to say that there is evidence to suggest that FEMA is extending, well, there's not evidence. They are, this is a fact. They are extending floodplains and changing up the data and statistics. Uh, Former flood plains are now floodways. Former once in a 500-year flood zone is now once in a 200-year flood zone and worse. Um, there is plenty of evidence suggesting the climate is changing. Now, is it the way that the politicians on whichever team you root for, is it what they say it is? Maybe, maybe not. But look, I don't really care about politics. I care about my business and I care about my people. And from what I can see, whether or not you think climate change is real is irrelevant because something is happening and it is making flood zones worse. I've had this is a real situation that I am dealing with at one of my properties that was in a partial flood zone is now in a complete flood zone. Thankfully, it is not a floodway. However, just adjacent to my property is a floodway, and I'm looking at this like, dude, in the next couple of years, my property may be in a floodway. And by the way, for those who don't know, a flood zone just means that once every X number of years, your property will flood, meaning the water is going to be sitting there. A floodway means that literally water will be running through your property as if it is, hi, Lily, as if you are now in a river or a creek or a stream. Hi, everybody. Yeah, that's
We need to fill it up for dinner.
is Bluey. Okay, Rennie, bye, Lily. Hey, Emma, you want to say hi to everybody and then bye, Lily. All right, can you do me a favor, bud? Can you go and lock my door, please?
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, everybody. No, please, like, actually walk out of the door and then thank you. Yes. Bye, buddy. I'll talk to you in a little bit. Yeah, my lock on my door, my kids figured out how to pick it. Sorry about that. So, anyways, those are my two lovely kids. They're a lot. And I love them with all my heart, but they're a lot. Anyways, okay, so flood zones, you got to have a lot of consideration. I don't care if you think climate change is real or not. Clearly, something is happening, and as business people, we have to attack it. We have to take it seriously. We have to pretend like it's real, even if we don't believe it's real. And we have to remember that anything is in a flood zone today may turn into a floodway tomorrow. And something that's not in a flood zone, but is close, we have to seriously consider if one day it may be in a flood zone. And if it is in a flood zone, your insurance costs are going to be higher, your risks are going to be higher. That being said, man, you can get good deals on them. And if the numbers make sense and the risk reward is there, Eric, I think you do it.
Yeah, that's good insight. I didn't even think of the changing flood zone maps and everything. That's really interesting. What about like park owned home heavy communities and flood zones? Do you look at those much differently? I mean,
No.
are the insurance costs going to be sky high because now you're insuring homes as well in a flood zone? How does that work?
No, I mean it's going to be more for sure than tenant-owned homes, but not really. I kind of I attack it the same way. It's just, again, you just got to remember your insurance costs are going to be more. Um, your risk is also going to be more. So you just got to get it at the right price.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks a lot for the insight. Appreciate it.
Great question. All right, I think we have time for one more question. And if Mike, if nobody has a question, then I know you got questions.
Yeah, for everyone listening, outside of Brookfield, I just closed on my first park. So I'm loading up questions for Ryan as well. I am an acquisitions expert, an underwriting expert, and I'm becoming an operations expert as well through my time with Ryan here. But that's why Ryan hosts the operational Q&A because he is the true legend. So I did ask a question earlier to Ryan, which is, Ryan, if I'm going to be paying my expenses out of two different accounts, or I have two different accounts when I open up, two accounts for my new business, for my new mobile home park. I'll have an escrow account and I'll have an operational account, generally speaking, for each of my properties, one to make distributions to either LPs or GPs, and contributions from those two entities as well. And then one to, I guess, pay out expenses for the park. There's also potential for other employees to have access to that operational account. So my question to you is like, where do you typically pay out your expenses from? Is it the operational or escrow account, or is it a completely different account entirely? And is it generally the park that's paying those expenses directly, or is it your management company?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, everybody does it differently, so I'm not going to pretend that I have the right answer. I'm happy to just briefly explain to everybody how, in a vacuum, I handle it. Generally speaking, I only have one bank account per property if I can. And then I have my property management and other properties have an operational bank account at that same bank. So then that way on my mobile app, I can jump in and send money between accounts, easy peasy. And my main one, I also have some personal accounts set up there. So what I can, it's personal money market accounts. So when I make a distribution to myself or my wife, or I can like just literally just go whoop whoop and pay myself, and it's great because my wife is like, "Gosh, like I know we do okay, but like it doesn't feel like it." I'm like, "Good,"
Perfect.
because I've moved our money over to a money market account, and you've never seen it, right? And so like then that way it doesn't get spent, and then that way you can, I continue to reinvest in my assets, but. That's generally speaking how I do it. Just one bank account that just is interlinked. Um, to operate, my property management LLC and all that jazz. That sounds great in a vacuum. In practice, generally speaking, I don't like, I think I have 8 or 9 different banks right now that I do business with, and they all want operational accounts at their bank. Like that is a requirement, this is a debt covenant. Like you have to have money coming in, at least AR coming in. If you want to pay out of a different account, fine. But AR has to come to us. And the reason why is if they foreclose on you, they want those automatic payments going into that bank account. They want control of that. So, in other words, oh, and by the way, banks right now in a riskier time, most macroeconomic people think we're headed towards a self-imposed recession, and I believe the current administration kind of wants that for various reasons. Some good, some maybe not good. I don't know. We'll see. But banks right now, knowing that we're potentially heading into a hopefully a light recession, they want deposits. because if people start not paying their mortgage, they want to make sure there's cash in the bank account to either pay off that mortgage or pay the mortgage payment until they can get solvent or liquidate the asset. So, in other words, if you've got a portfolio the size that I do, or even a fraction of what I have, you've probably got multiple different loans at multiple different bank accounts who want deposits and they want at least operational accounts, at least from the an AR perspective. And so how I've solved for that is I've banked with Service First, I've banked with KeyBank, Wells Fargo, just to name a few. And it's a little bit annoying and a little bit tedious, but if you can set up that same structure where you have property management account, and all of the properties at one bank account, even if it's a second bank account, you can then do intra-bank transfers in and amongst them. And generally speaking, I pay out my distributions to myself and investors through my property management LLC or a fund LLC. So then that way, each property has its own operational bank account, and I can just, hop on my laptop, hop on my mobile app, and just transfer money and then send it out from there. So that's more or less how I do it. Michael, it sounds like you have an escrow account. That may be a New York State thing. I have escrow accounts. They are only for security deposits. So I don't have an air quotes escrow account, or at least it's not mandated, and I certainly don't want to create more work for myself in that regard. But I hope that more or less answers your question, and anyone else who was curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna bring you a ton of accounting questions as I start to ramp up my operations, and I'm hoping that others benefit from these types of questions as well. And guys, everyone who's listening, and after the fact, we're gonna have Rent Manager on here, who is gonna do an hour-long Q&A monthly to answer any specific questions that you might have in your rent manager platforms if you do decide to go with that accounting platform. It's the one we recommend. And so we'll answer some operational type accounting questions on here. There'll be a lot of questions related to this kind of stuff on those calls as well. So as our mastermind becomes more and more seasoned, and we have a ton of operators in there already, many of whom are mentees for group and 1v1, but so many of whom are not, are going to be joining these calls as well. So, we'll have those types of questions as well. Bring your questions ahead of time. Feel free to add them into the group ahead of time. We can come even more prepared to kind of dive deep on some of your operational questions as all of you buy your first and next park. So thanks for everyone for joining today. And our next call is tomorrow with Ferd Neiman. He'll be doing a legal Q&A. We're super excited about that. So if you have some time, join up and ask him any and all legal questions. It'll be a really good and informative session. So looking forward to seeing you all there. Have a great night, guys.